And just to, before we open up to audience questions, because I know I've seen a few hands up already, just to flip it on its head, and I understand space can seem something which is so unrelatable to our day-to-day lives, and it feels like something which is there, which we don't need to invest in, even though we've got a huge market potential, huge coming from space. But I was just wondering if you could both briefly explain what a day without space would look like, and perhaps that can help highlight why space is such an exciting area and why we should be paying more attention.
Well, I mean, there's been various assessments have done of what impact it would be even if the GPS system went offline for a day. The calculation is it would damage the economy to the effect of about £1 billion a day.
Wow.
And that's from the loss of productivity of all our delivery vans who now rely on GPS, the way that we all rely on GPS to sort of navigate ourselves around the world. And then when you build in things like the communication systems that rely on satellites, our TV services that rely on satellites, you would suddenly find yourselves living a quite different life if you had to say goodbye to space technology for a day.
I think also there are other applications, I would say, not just the financial ones, but also defense recovery from weather events. We've got much better at managing flooding. How does that happen? Mitigations that we need to put in place. We've understood an awful lot more about coastline erosion. We understand how to identify the telltale signs in advance of a catastrophe and trying to avert them. I know that's still very much work in progress, and yes, indeed, Glasgow was flooded just 2 days ago, and the train stopped. So maybe that was a good excuse to point more towards space and the need to harvest more data to be able to understand it better. But I think that's a very good example, again, of an intangible, perhaps necessarily straight in our pockets, but it's one that's very much an emotional drive at the moment.
And even our ability to weather forecast, I think that's probably had the single biggest economic impact of any sort of over the years, our ability to forecast the weather. When I first started working on weather satellites about 20 years ago, the meteorologist told me that statistically we would be better off just saying tomorrow will be the same as today than trying to forecast it. Things have gone leaps and bounds.
I think the 3-day forecast is now as accurate as a 24-hour forecast or something like that.
5 years ago, absolutely.
It's really, but then there's
amazing.
Food production as well, and
exactly.
Farming. And
the efficiency of farming relies massively on weather forecasts.
If we're going to meet net zero, if we're going to meet all these challenges we face as a species, if we're going to feed an ever-growing population, we need space-based technology. I think it's important to clarify that if you're looking to invest in space, if you're looking to understand more about this system, yes, of course, there's that sexy side, which is humans returning to the moon, maybe one day Mars, but the vast majority of what we do in space is about Earth. It's about improving all our lives on Earth. And if all of you, I'm pretty sure all of you have a space receiver in your pocket. It is, of course, your smartphone that you carry around with you. And I think that's the best way of looking at it. But if we could just open up to some audience questions. I know the lady there had a question. I'm going to have to repeat your question, so maybe it wouldn't be very loud. Or have we got a gentleman with a microphone behind you?
I'm just wondering how much of an uphill struggle it is to persuade the UK population that space research is a good thing. We recently had a popular prince sort of say we should kind of abandon space research and go into climate change. And the fact that they can say that or even think that, they must think it's a very popular, they'll get a lot of support and it appears on the front pages. I don't see the space industry sort of counteracting it. And also, people like Tim Peake, he appears on the One Show, whereas an American astronaut is treated like a god. So, how much of you have to change the public perception. How much of an uphill struggle is it?
Well, I'm going to pick up on this question. My background is an astrophysicist. I work in TV and in the commercial space sector in the US, but I'm also a journalist. And I think one of the most difficult problems we actually face within the UK is STEM illiteracy within the media, because I have a journalism qualification. I had to understand law. I didn't have to understand mathematics. Of course I did, because of my academic background. And I think we need to see a shift in the media, because you mentioned Tim Peake, and you mentioned perhaps Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, but that is not the space industry. The space tourism, for example, is such a tiny, tiny part of investor capital within the commercial space sector. Space is about people like us, people, engineers and scientists. It's environmental scientist, a late great British American astronaut who you probably haven't heard of, called Piers Sellers, who helped to build the International Space Station, and during his dying year was the assistant director of Goddard Space Center and campaigned for climate change and all the great work that NASA's doing for climate change. So yes, there is a hurdle, and when we do need to counteract that, but it's a situation which happens with the media as well. We face this STEM illiteracy problem. We've seen it with COVID in the last year, for example, and it's a bigger societal problem, but there's great things happening within the space industry, and there's great change happening, and change is happening much faster than you realize. If you look at the most obvious example, which is SpaceX landing rockets back on Earth, 6 years ago, that was impossible. Now it's something which is almost routine. So there's a huge amount of change happening, and the shift will come from media perception, but that is a wider societal problem.
I would like to say, answer it with a question. How many people in this room knew that the UK had a 50th anniversary of being in space yesterday? How many people? How many people knew about the Black Arrow rocket that was launched in 1971? And how many people knew what the mission of the satellite that was launched on that rocket? The mission of that satellite was to understand the environment, to improve our better understanding of the telecommunications satellite that was launched at that time. That is the answer to the question. If we as society don't know and appreciate what it is we've done, how we've been so successful so far, I think the answer to the question is be more inquisitive. We, as a launch service provider, are desperately keen to engage society now into our activities, both from the point of view of environmental launch, from the point of view of understanding more on a practical level what it means, and also getting buy-in. Buy-in about what? About space debris. Is space debris a problem? Question mark. Who knows? Answer the question. We need to start measuring what the rubbish is in space. We need to understand how much there is there, whether it's an issue, and we as society need to answer for us, the question we need to answer for ourselves is, are we going to start launching and put endless more satellites up there? Or are we going to listen to the astronomers who are already complaining about Starlink and saying there's light pollution, there's RF pollution, we can't see the stars going forward. What are you doing about it? So the questions we need to have as a society for us, in order to be successful as a successful new space station, we need to be answering the questions, what's the level of saturation of satellites going onto orbit? We need to answer the question, how are we going to measure the environmental impact assessment of our activity in space? We need to answer the question, if we take a satellite out of orbit and we put it into the Earth's atmosphere to burn up, what does that burning up process mean for our Earth atmosphere? What emissions are there? How does that affect the seagrass? What are the CO2 emissions? There are a whole load of questions that we as an industry want to level through into society to be able to have that dialogue. We're looking to do it in the context of the House of Commons, to have a debate on that, about how the UK can lead, be responsible, and look forward to being, again, a leader in this area. And yes, we are utilizing people such as Tim Peake, celebrities, such as Brian May, and such as our wonderful colleague here. So I think there are much bigger questions that need to be answered, and we're looking forward to that engagement. Sorry.
And we have one more question there, gentleman in the yellow sweater. Just wait for the microphone to come round. If we can get the microphone to you. Keep the questions answered short. Sorry.
Essentially, the method of getting to satellites and various craft into space is done by fossil fuel. Is there a move to change this? And
yes.
Who is sponsoring it?
That was a short answer.
Yeah.
And
yes,
I think
absolutely. Maybe you need to check your science as well, because often it's water, it's much greener than we realise, but it's something which is changing. There are so few launches. I think there's a life in a year we launch less space rockets than we do aeroplanes in a minute or something like that. But I know, Alan, you're going to pick up with the technical details and how we're changing launch to be more environmentally friendly.
So Skyrora has a solution taking unrecyclable plastic, turning it into a rocket propellant 1 equivalent. We're taking it through pyrolysis, we're extracting rocket propellant 1, so we are looking to remove existing hydrocarbons that are in landfill or from ocean and turning that into rocket propellant, so we're utilizing it. Yes, that's not taking the CO2 ultimately out of it. The other solution that we have, which is this British pioneer technology, in pound per thrust, because we're utilizing hydrogen peroxide as our oxidizer, that means we're burning less hydrocarbons. So the equivalent is 6.6 parts of hydrogen peroxide oxidizer to 1 part of kerosene. So we're actually using less hydrocarbons to get the power to get it into orbit. We believe that's a useful place to start from. That's not the total answer to the question. And yes, there is no ultimate CO2 neutral power source to get us into orbit, perhaps apart from nuclear. Yes, we are looking into plasma sources of different sources of power and thrust for propulsion, but yes, we need to work more on this, and that's an opportunity.
And I'm just going to finish there, so we unfortunately haven't got any time to wrap up because we've got to go on to our next session. But space is a huge industry, and just to finish up, summarise, both of you, what the value is to come from space and what it means to both of you to be part of this industry, which is changing the world as well as going into the unknown.
Yeah, so space was the only industry that I ever wanted to work on when I was growing up, and actually it never occurred to me that I'd be able to pursue that industry here in the UK. And so over the last 30 years while I've been working in this industry, it's amazed me how things have progressed. And I think we are at a real turning point now. I think 100 years ago, Henry Ford was at the height of his production of the Model T Ford. And we all see how much, before that it was just a technology, internal combustion engine that was there for rich people and the States, but we saw how he transformed it and made it relevant to the masses, and we saw the impact that's had on the 21st century, on the 20th century. I genuinely think we're at the same point now for space, and so it's a huge opportunity for all of us now to take advantage of.
And Alan?
It's transformational. We're going to see a huge growth in skills. We're going to see a complete change of the economic makeup, I believe, in the very short future. So it's exhilarating. It's really quite remarkable and a very compelling industry to look more closer to and hopefully engage with.
Okay, well, Alan Thompson, Head of Government Affairs for Skyrora, and Stuart Martin, CEO of Satellite Applications Catapult. Thank you very much for your time.